Good evening, and welcome to the Rush. Welcome to the Rush this evening. It is Friday, folks. Friday, the 11th of March, 2022. My name is Randolph Critchell. I want to say thank you very much for being a part of the broadcast this evening. Welcome to those persons joining us internationally in the region and right here in Guyana. We are going to be unpacking some economic information. We're going to be talking business. This is the Rush Business for Friday, the 11th of March 2022, folks. And we are happy that you have joined the program. Of course, we encourage you to say where you're joining us from. Let us know where you're joining us from in the comment section and share the live stream, folks. We're going to be joined by Mr. Elson Lowe, our economist, the resident economist, and we're going to be talking as the program heading suggests this evening, folks. Poverty, dealing with poverty in Guyana. Dealing with poverty in Guyana. We're going to have an interesting discussion on poverty alleviation methods and strategies, and we're going to be digging deep into the history of poverty in Guyana and how do we move our people from poverty and move as many persons as possible to that middle class level, folks. How do we do that? What economic model is the best? Folks, we're going to be talking a lot about issues that affect your pocket. We know that oil prices, gas prices are going through the roof. We know globally that we have lots of things going on in the world that are pushing those gas prices up. We're going to be talking about that also. But before we get starting in all the information and the news that affect your wallet and your pocket, let's start the program the right way. We encourage you folks to operate a little hurry there on the job. We encourage you to share the live stream and let us know where you're joining us from. Let us know where you're joining us from this evening, folks. Let's unpack. Yes, we are here and we are back, folks. It is the Rush. We like to start the program the right way. That's just our intro. We're going to be going to a little break in a few seconds, but let me give some shout out to the persons who are joining us from all over the world. New Jersey, Georgetown, West Bank, Antigua is in the house. Thank you very much. Riz Rock, Linden, my hometown. I always have to give shout out to my hometown, Linden. East Bank is in the house. Welcome, Mike Coney, Antigua again, Toronto, Canada, New Jersey, Linden. We have so many people joining from Antigua. Big up the folks there in Antigua. Yes, Miss Howard. My Auntie Howard is on the line. My Auntie Howard is here and she is joining us. Yes. We always see that you're one of the first here. Thank you very much for being a part. Bartica Belladrum, Virgin Islands, Virginia. Thank you very much, Tortola, for tuning in. We actually share the live stream as you come in. Share the live stream as you come in, folks. That's all we ask of you, that you share the live stream as you come in. That's what we want, for you to share the live stream, as today we are going to Riverton, Berbice River, reading loud and clear. Thank you very much, Mr. Leacock. Port Kaituma, Agricola. Port Kaituma, PK people, how you doing? How are you doing this evening? Let us know what is happening in your neck of the woods. Let us know what is happening in your neck of the woods. Folks, we are sharing the live stream. We are ensuring that we are on all of the pages. We are not on all of the pages at the moment. So we're hoping to ensure that we... Ravi said he's coming from Russia. Mucka Arcadia, thank you very much for tuning in. French Guyana, thank you very much for tuning in. Ivan Adam, let's get ready to rumble. Ivan, we're going to be rumbling in a moment, but of course, we here at the Rush Business, we talk about the issues that affect your pocket. And tonight we are focusing on poverty and poverty alleviation in Guyana. How do we move? How do we move the thousands of people living in poverty out of their situation? what are the policies that need to be employed so that we can do that. Remember, we are all about solutions here. We are all about solving the problems. Yes, we can highlight the ills and the indiscretions of the PPP, but at the end of the day, if we don't offer a proper strategy and a solution, then we're just talking heads, and we don't want to be talking heads. We want to be able to say to the Guyanese people, look, the APNU AFC is a proper alternative to the installed regime that we have right now. And how do we do that? We do that by showing you what can be, what exists, the deficiencies of those, and what can be. What are the solutions to the problems that you are facing right now? That is what we do here in the Rush business. That is what the APNU AFC is all about. It's about showing you that what exists is not necessarily what can be. And how do we move from what is to what can be? And those are the solutions we will talk about this evening. Michelle Jones says to move the installed PPP cross it. Yes, that is a strategy. That is a political strategy. That is what is supposed to be what the main goal of the opposition is, to move them out of power. Because again, there's a lot of things that wouldn't change if the PPP are still there squatting in the seat of government, installed as they are. But folks, we ask you to share the live stream. Let us know where you're joining us from. New Jersey, Brooklyn, thank you very much for tuning in. Mr. Hack says he's joining us from the diaspora. Thank you very much for tuning in this evening, sir. Thank you very much for tuning in. Those person in Brooklyn, let me say shout out to the Brooklyn people who are repping the Brooklyn Nets. You know, I like to talk about my basketball before I start the program. I love to talk about my basketball. Who enjoyed that game last night? You know, I asked in the class, you raise your hands if you enjoyed that game last night. The Brooklyn Nets making a mess, as the people would say, of the Philadelphia 76ers. Of course, we know the recent history between those two teams, with that recent trade of James Harden and Ben Simmons. Whole lot of subplots. But of course, I have been on the Nets bandwagon since KD went there, so I'm going to stay on the Nets bandwagon. Maryland, thank you very much for tuning in. Share the live stream. Brooklyn, Maureen Paul, I hope you're repping the Brooklyn Nets. I know they're stuck in the 8th position right now, but a very dangerous team. And I like to talk my basketball, folks. I like to get my basketball in before. Right? Jude Bentley is saying that Guyana, let me take some comments before we get into the program. Guyana could never alleviate itself out of poverty when the two major political parties are full of corrupt politicians, right? Well, you have a point. Good governance is a big part of ensuring your citizens move from poverty. And if I speak on corruption is something that no political party could say that they will alleviate completely. But you can try. You can work towards having as little corruption as possible. That is what I see. I know what you're saying, Bentley. I know what you're saying. Carla Smith, sorry, is saying Lakers. Carla, I do not believe. You should, nobody should say the Lakers name. Nobody. If you're still on the Lakers bandwagon, you're a real fan. Let me say this to you. David McKenzie said, Brooklyn watching. Yes, I saw that match. It was a good game last night. Carla, I do not believe you still have face. Lakers fans should be hiding their faces right now. My Carla. Sorry about that. Catherine says she's joining from Freedom House. I hope that you have your device turned up loud so whoever is in Freedom House right now can hear us. Carla says she's hoping for the Lakers. I hope that the Lakers make the playoff. That's all I hope. But let's move, folks. Let's move. Again, we're asking you to share the live stream. I will get, let me see if I can get on my end someone to share our stream on the various pages. Um, so we'll be back in just a few minutes as we share and ensure that we start the program, folks. We have Mr. Elson Lowe in the green room ready to come in, and we'll be coming back to talk about poverty in Guyana. Yes, we are back, folks. We are back. We still have not been able to share on the various pages. I'm trying to get someone to share one of our operators to get that done for us, so that we can get started. 1 second, folks. Just ensuring that we are on all the pages. Yes, folks. Let's jump in here, folks, and let's talk about what our topic is today. Poverty, dealing with poverty in Guyana. Dealing with poverty in Guyana. And I want to start the ball rolling. We asked a question in the beginning. We started talking about poverty and how we can move poverty, move our people out of poverty, so to speak. Right? Move our people out of the poverty. Gavin Liverpool is saying, I truly believe that Guyana alone have one corrupt politician that influences the others the wrong way. If somebody call his name, I will take out my dentures and whistle. Gavin, thank you very much for that. Again, somebody can call his name in the comment section for Gavin. Gavin, we want to hear you whistle. Oh, boy. Let me just ensure that we are there. Gavin? Somebody said Jack Dio. Albert says Jack Dio. But let's go, folks. Now, it's no laughing matter. After this country would have had independence, we have been trying as a nation for all of these years to lift our citizens out of this state of poverty. I mean, we have much to blame on colonialism, but there are many countries who came out of colonial rule and were able to organize themselves in such a manner that they, they're able to move their citizens from that place of poverty and move more persons to this place closer to the middle class. But how do we do that? What is the model? What is it that the government has to do? We've had, over 50 years now of Republican status. We've been trying all sort of things. We plugged into the international system. We've been receiving aid. We've been working on exploiting our natural resources so that it can work for our people. What is it that we need to do, right? What is it that we need to do? Now, I saw an interesting video recently, and I want to share it with you. But it speaks about this paradox of poverty, and it speaks to it from an angle or a viewpoint. Gavin, good night. Bernadette Duncan is saying good night to Gavin. Gavin, who is one who posed that thing. Gavin, I think a number of persons would have mentioned the name. Now, how do we have proof that you will have taken out your dentures and whistled? Yes, but folks, it speaks about poverty from more of a first world perspective. There are a number of countries who have what we call government subsidies, social services that support people who are unemployed. Unemployment benefits. It help you with your rent. It help you with various aspects of your life that you can pay certain things. Of course, we have our little pickings, what we call the public assistance here in Guyana for those persons who are not, but there isn't a structured unemployment benefit, so to speak, in this country. But I want us to look at the video anyhow because it offers some interesting perspective as we talk about poverty, as we talk about those persons who are caught in this cycle of poverty and how they get out. But I want us to be able to look at this video, and after this video, we'll come in with our economist Elson Loan. We'll discuss further on what it is Guyana has to do, what it is that Guyana has to do to kind of move themselves away from this scourge of poverty. I hope I'm getting that to come in. Just give us a few seconds, folks. Give us a few seconds.
Imagine that you've been unemployed and seeking work for months. Government benefit programs have helped you cover rent, utilities, and food, but you're barely getting by. Finally, you hear back about a job application. You receive your first paycheck in months, and things seem to be turning around, but there's a catch. Your new job pays just enough to disqualify you from the benefit programs, and not enough to cover the same costs. To make things worse, you have to pay for transportation to work and childcare while you're at the office. Somehow, you have less money now than when you were unemployed. Economists call this demoralizing situation the welfare trap, one of the many different poverty traps affecting millions of people around the world. Poverty traps are economic and environmental circumstances that reinforce themselves, perpetuating poverty for generations. Some poverty traps are tied to an individual's circumstances, like a lack of access to healthy food or education. Others can affect entire nations, such as cycles of corrupt government or climate change. But the cruel irony of welfare traps in particular is that they stem from the very policies designed to battle poverty. Most societies throughout history employed some strategies to help people in poverty meet basic needs. Before the 20th century, religious groups and private charities often led such initiatives. Today, these are called welfare programs, and they usually take the form of government-provided subsidies for housing, food, energy, and healthcare. Typically, these programs are means-tested, meaning that only people who fall below a certain income level are eligible for benefits. This policy is designed to ensure aid goes to those who need it most, but it also means people lose access as soon as they earn more than the qualification threshold, regardless of whether or not they're financially stable enough to stay there. This vicious cycle is harmful to both those in poverty and those outside of it. Mainstream economic models assume people are rational actors who weigh the cost and benefits of their options and choose the most advantageous path forward. If those in poverty know they'll gain no net benefit from working, they're incentivized to remain on government assistance. Of course, people work for many reasons, including societal norms and personal values. But income is a major incentive to pursuing employment. And when less people take on new jobs, the economy slows down, keeping people in poverty and potentially pushing people on the cusp of poverty over the edge. Some have suggested this feedback loop could be removed by eliminating government assistance programs altogether. But most agree this solution is neither realistic nor humane. So how can we redesign benefits in a way that doesn't penalize people for working? Many countries have tried different ways to circumvent this problem. Some allow people to continue receiving benefits for a given period after finding a job, while others phase out benefits gradually as income increases. These policies still remove some financial incentive to work, but the risk of a welfare trap is lower. Other governments provide benefits like education, childcare, or medical care, equally across all their citizens. One proposed solution takes this idea of universal benefits even further. A universal basic income would provide a fixed benefit to all members of society, regardless of wealth or employment status. This is the only known policy that could entirely remove welfare traps, since any earned wages would supplement the benefit rather than replace it. In fact, by creating a stable income floor below which no one can fall, basic income might prevent people from falling into poverty in the first place. Numerous economists and thinkers have championed this idea since the 18th century, but for now, universal basic income remains largely hypothetical. Although it's been tried in some places on a limited scale, these local experiments don't tell us much about how the policy would play out across an entire nation or a planet. Whatever strategy governments pursue, solving the welfare trap requires respecting people's agency and autonomy. Only by empowering individuals to create long-term change in their lives and communities can we begin to break the cycle of poverty. Agency is a type of power that comes from the marriage of action and choice. But what exactly is power? What role?
Right, right, folks. That there is an interesting look into what they deem as the welfare trap. Now, poverty in Guyana takes on a different color, takes on a different hue because we are a different country. We don't necessarily have such an advanced welfare program. But to discuss this and how we move our citizens out of poverty in the Guyana context, I invite to the program our resident economist, Mr. Elson Lowe. Elson, welcome to the program this evening.
Hi, good to be on. Good to be on.
Thank you very much for being a part of our program again as we talk this evening about poverty alleviation. I know we're going to be looking at the proposals, I guess, and the ideas coming out of the PNCR, but I want to take us holistically and look at Guyana's history as it relates to poverty, coming out of colonialism and trying to forge an identity for ourselves, and exploit our resources for our people and the struggles that we had over the years, and the fact that we in 2022 are largely still a poor nation. Your thoughts?
Yes, absolutely. I think that as much as we're seeing robust economic growth, that doesn't necessarily mean that for the average Guyanese, you're seeing incomes increase, and that we're really seeing people move out of poverty. In fact, due to increases in the cost of living, we may be seeing some people fall into poverty. And poverty can be defined in various ways. Some people use US $5 a day as the marker. Some can use US $2 a day as the marker. But coming out of the colonial period, there would have been very high levels of poverty. You would have had very low levels of business ownership by anyone who was not, someone from the British Isles. And so, as a result of that, you were coming from a situation where there was substantial poverty, and in fact, there were hardly any schools. There was not much infrastructure when we gained independence. A lot of that had been built out. But that is deep in our history. More recently, when we look at poverty surveys and so on, even ones from 2017, ones that go further back, we see that poverty in Guyana has hovered around the 40% range, which is still very high compared to other countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, which have it in the 20s, low 20s, mid 20s. To be in the 40s is quite high, and I think we often forget that Guyana has historically been the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And so, what we're seeing here in terms of the growth in income is really a shock. It's a big shock, and it is our task to ensure that this substantial change results in a change in the level of poverty in the country. And of course, we in the PNC believe that we need to eliminate poverty altogether.
I want to follow up on some of the numbers that you threw out there, as this IDB report that points out five facts about poverty in Guyana. Right. First of all, uh, that the poverty rate is high. As obvious as that statement is, it's true that the poverty rate is very high in Guyana. Uh, like you mentioned, the measuring stick is $5.50. This is $5 US, and the amount of persons in Guyana, the percentage of people living on less than $5 per day, I believe this is. It's for the 1.2%, and this was 2017. I must add, this is not this is some 5 years ago, but that number is for the was for the 1.2%. Secondly, poverty greatly affects children and young adults. All right, with a 47.5% of the Guyanese that face extreme poverty are those persons 16 and younger. All right. The next serious issue that people do not often look to when they talk about poverty in Guyana is that the immigration and trained or skilled people, um, the emigration of them, sorry, is problematic. That we have a serious brain drain issue that adds to this problem of poverty, and we will get into why that is so. Environmental instability affects economic growth. And finally, malnutrition is a serious issue, especially among our indigenous population. There are five issues that laid out there that kind of gives you a good picture of poverty in Guyana. Um, but I want us to start thinking about what has been done over the years, Elson, and where are we now, right? How have we tried to stem this issue of poverty?
Yes, absolutely. Well, if you recall, I think that both sides of the aisle, coming out of independence, were very much coming from a left wing kind of school of thought, and that I think was born out of the high levels of poverty that we saw in the country.
Indeed.
Uh, yeah, that we saw in the country. Now, left wing politics and left wing governance can be done, but it must be done in a way that is effective, and that is a difficult thing to do. And I think that no matter which party was in charge of Guyana in those early years, and through to the 70s and 80s, I think they would have faced very similar challenges and maybe not even responded as well. And so, in terms of reducing poverty, we did a good job of putting in place a lot of infrastructure to assist. But in terms of overall eradication of poverty and so on, that is not something that we've been able to accomplish. And so as a result of not being able to accomplish that, we still have such high levels.
Yeah.
Now, we anticipate that that will change now, but that is really the question to be asked.
And for those persons viewing, when you speak of left wing politics, politics, when we talk about left leaning policies, we're speaking about those policies that have more of a nationalistic or should I quote socialist stance, where and just for clarity's sake, for our viewers who might not be as informed, we throw out terms there. Um, our initial sort of economic models in the country had that leftist slants, where of course we had um, the first executive president, um, Lyndon Forbes Sansom Burnham, who believe that we can feed, clothe, hold ourselves. There was a lot of nationalization, or with this word nationalizing of industries. We can speak of the bauxite industry, and to ensure that the resources work for us. And interestingly, I want to play a video for yourself and our viewers that speaks to this view that Burnham had as it relates to moving our people out of poverty. Let me see if our operators can find the video here so that we can talk about this here, Elson. And I was very surprised that you said leftist, because I wanted to deal with this. Right? Let's see if we can cue it up to where we had a conversation with
equipment.
Right. I
country
think
has to be
we are
spent in
here.
Britain. It is tied, like most of the aid that the poor countries get from the rich. Guyana has a big mining industry that produces bauxite, the raw material of aluminium. As part of its policy of greater self-reliance, it nationalized one of the bauxite companies and found itself in a major row. Its Prime Minister, Mr. Forbes Burnham, like some other third world leaders, has growing doubts about aid. He fears go strings, he criticizes its terms and is worried about its effect on national morale.
Prime Minister, you're on record as saying that aid is raid. What are your objections to aid?
It's not so much my objections to aid, but my objections to the form which aid takes. Normally, the countries giving aid insist on your using up practically all of the aid which they give in purchase of their goods and services. And as a former president of the World Bank has pointed out, this normally means a loss of about 1 shilling in the pound of aid to the recipient of aid.
Some of the donors or lenders of money for your seawall project, notably Britain, do allow a proportion, I think it's 40% of the money they give you, to be spent locally, don't they?
Well, that was in the case of the British. They have not been as bad as the others. But the other objection, of course, is that they prefer to identify the projects in which you'll spend aid rather than giving what we want, which is program aid for an entire development program.
It sometimes appears that within the poor countries of the world, that a sort of rhetoric is used, particularly in addressing large audiences, with slogans that aid is exploitation, that aid is raid, and so forth, which must rather discourage the donor nations.
Well, in my case, it's not idle rhetoric. It arises from a study of our facts. And that is why we have placed greater emphasis on national self-reliance. Because in my view, aid can never build a country. It dehumanizes the individuals and makes them lose confidence in themselves.
Well, if aid can't bridge the gap between the rich world and the poor world, what can the poor countries do to bridge the gap?
As I see it, there are two principal things to be done, at least, or possibly three. One, there must be a greater self-reliance and involvement of the people in the case of each of the poor nations. Two, there must be a more concerted and definitive attempt to increase the flow of trade between developing countries. And thirdly, the developing countries ought to have a rather uniform policy so that when there are resources in their countries which the rich countries want, the rich countries will be made to pay for them fairly and adequately.
Do you think the poor countries can achieve these rearrangements?
Well, I think if they don't achieve it, they'll perish.
Do you believe that there's no altruism in aid?
Very little, if any.
You don't think that the taxpayers who contribute and that the governments who persuade them to contribute are doing so out of a spirit of trying to help?
Maybe the taxpayers, but certainly not the governments. But incidentally, I don't quarrel about this. We live in a materialist world.
Prime Minister, this year you took over a large Canadian-owned bauxite company in this country. Has that resulted in pressures from the rich world on you?
Oh, it certainly has. First of all, we have the pressures from the company itself, running down machinery and equipment, making it difficult at first for us to get inputs. And then the United States representative from the World Bank opposed a World Bank loan to us for sea defenses. And there have been all sorts of pressures. We negotiated a loan with the United States recently, and then suddenly they said they'll have to reconsider the matter for another 7 months or thereabouts.
Why did you take over the company?
Because it is my conviction, my government's policy, and my people's belief that Guyana and all other countries like Guyana ought to own and control their natural resources. These resources in bauxite, which are some of the richest in the world, in quality and in quantity, have been exploited by outsiders, and we have got the minimal benefits. And we proposed to the company that we took over the majority holdings. Apparently, their power psychology precluded their being able to accept that, and we had to nationalize them. That's all. It's ours.
Wow, wow, wow. A lot to unpack there, Elson. A lot to unpack. Let me just zone in on one thing that he said there. He said, you know what? His belief is that countries like Guyana should own and control the natural resources. And he's speaking here as, of course, the bauxite industry was nationalized. And, he said that the power psychology wouldn't allow them to do that. But we're drifting into another topic there. But let's continue because he did address some issues that related specifically to poverty alleviation. He spoke about things like self-reliance, right? And trade with other developing countries. I know that you did mention our leftist policies as a young nation, but what has happened? Talk us through the evolution of this movement to push people out of poverty.
Yes, well, what I would say is, I agree with a lot of what he said there. I understand a lot of what he said. I think that, or at least history has taught us, that the primary issue or the primary problem that led to economic problems in the past with Guyana is a question of who it is that should be carrying out these policies and this strategy. And one of the things that leftist governments will tend to do is they'll tend to want the government to have a bigger role in the economy and the government to be the one that is carrying out these types of policies and activities. So, we would have had quite a large private sector doing various things in Guyana, but were they able to do it off of their own steam or were they benefiting from government policies to help them to carry out those activities? And I think that unfortunately, governments are not always the best at investing, the best at picking winners, the best at managing companies. And Ghana Bauxite Company, as much as it was nationalized, you have to think about whether the management of it was very effective and so on. I would say in a modern context, because we're talking about deep history here. In the modern context, the simple thing to ask yourself is if Guyana had had a national oil company doing prospecting offshore, would we have been able to find the same amount of oil that Exxon has found and produce it in an efficient manner, in the way that Exxon is producing it? Now, I think that that is highly improbable, and in fact, Guyana does have a at least partially local homegrown oil and gas company. I'm sure they've been putting forward their best bets, but they recently were able to find oil, but they've been searching for quite some time. So maybe that will give you a counterfactual to what a local version of Exxon might have done or might have how it might have performed. Now, that is not to say that there isn't a role for the government. It's just a question of how the government should function and what to what extent the government should be involved in these types of activities. Good left wing governance, effective left wing governance, is not so much about control of resources. It is not so much even about distribution of natural resources. What it is about is effective spending of those resources that are distributed. Effective spending. And left wing governments that have been very effective, that have had high levels of success, have been left wing governments that have been very effective at their spending. You look at Lula's Brazil, where they were very good, performance rates in things like education and so on. You look at your Norways and your Swedens, which have some of the best education systems in the world and routinely perform at the top in terms of their performance marks for students at various grades. You look at the levels of corruption in those countries. And so, if you want to govern well from the left, from a more left wing perspective, it is not so much about focusing on getting as many of the natural resources as possible, but focusing on very effective, very specific, very well measured policies, because that will be effective. One of the things that we must stress is that investing in education is not just because we want to help people get an education, but because we will boost the productivity of students, and that will boost the GDP as a whole. So it's just like investing in a road. Investing in education can boost your GDP just the same as investing in a road. What is important is that the dollars that you spend on things like education produce good results. Under the coalition, we saw the education, the pass rates for things like English and math go up substantially. We saw the best years in terms of the pass rates at CXC for those types of subjects. And so that's an example of very effective spending. And so I think, those are lessons that we've learned from history. And unfortunately, it's been a long and difficult road, and Guyana has had a difficult road. But it's something that we've learned. And I also want to point out to you viewers that some of the policies that were being followed by that government, a lot of it really conceptually is called import substitution industrialization. That's the general conceptual framework, which is where, of course, you have the self-reliance and so on, but with a lot of government support. Those policies were being pursued across the entirety of Latin America. So it is not that it was a peculiar policy followed by Guyana or anything like that. But ultimately, the policies didn't work out. And subsequent leftist leaders like Lula have focused much more on ensuring that money is spent effectively. And as a result, Lula has a long track record of good governance and of being well liked by his people.
As you mentioned, Lula, that of course, as a student of politics, a political science student, I admire some of the works and some of his sayings. One of my favorite is that he said that the job of an elected official is to fix the obvious. Is to fix the obvious, right? Very often your constituency tells you right off the bat what they want and what is most important to them, and your job is to fix that, whether it be the roads, whether it be the lights, whether it be increase in salary. They tell you what it is that is affecting them. But as we speak about, we got into in terms of leftist economic models and these things. What I wanted to point out, though, like those governments that you mentioned, the Norways and these places, there is emphasis paid on quality of life of citizens, whether it be through ensuring free and cheap health care, ensuring equal access to education, ensuring that the social net, the social safety net includes everybody in the country. And this is something that I believe that we have failed our Guyanese people on. The first video that we showed spoke about that welfare program that exists in certain developed countries. The persons who are unemployed get money for food and transportation and utilities and certain things. And for me, we have failed to put a social safety net in place, so those persons who are suffering, who don't have a job, who are not able to earn the big salaries, can feel as if they're still a part of society. They can afford health care. They can still afford to go to school. And for me, again, people can you can throw as much mud as you want on the socialist model, but taking care of your citizens is top priority. You might pay some more tax. You might pay more taxes for this comfort. But I believe that that is something that we have lacked in the country. I know that coming through the 90s, we had to engage a more open model. We had to open up our economy. We plugged into the global financial system. And that comes with its own rules and regulations as to what you can do. But let's fast forward. We in 2020, we have discovered oil. We have a natural resource that is exploitable to the point where we can empower and give our citizens more. What it is that we need to do now. 2020, we've come through the history. We know our history. We are here now. We have all these oil reserves. We have companies working here. How does the government position itself to ensure that the majority of this small population moves out of poverty? Talk to us about policies.
Yes, absolutely. Well, when we talk about these issues, there's two important things to note. One being that, you have to have a principle that as a right, we want to see people in a country not suffering and not in poverty. In general, that's one of our main aims. But also, and this is again where it is critical, it's about making sure that the policies are very effective. In Venezuela, they were able to reduce poverty substantially for a short period of time, but the corruption that was there was monstrous.
Mhm.
And people will say, oh, countries like Norway, they don't have corruption and so on. There's very little corruption in Norway, but do you know that Norwegian oil companies have been accused of corruption in other countries? Right? So it's not that Norwegians are not corrupt. It's that they've got an effective system of governance. They use their money efficiently and they have good outcomes. So investing in education, investing in healthcare, these things on the one hand are rights and things that we uphold because we want people to have a good life, to be comfortable. But on the other hand, these are areas to be administered effectively so that we can get progress. And I think that that really is one of the key problems that we've had over the years in Guyana, and we're really now looking to address as it concerns a lot of the policies that the coalition has put forward. As much as we want to always stress these policies must be efficient in the way that they're managed, we must also note that there are increases in the cost of living in Guyana. That's quite apart from the general development discussion, quite apart from the conversation around poverty that are raising the stakes, are making it more difficult, is actually decreasing the standard of living for people, and most of all for people who are themselves on that poverty line or not earning a substantial income. And so, what we're doing is looking at the circumstances and looking at means in the form of a minimum livable income to address a lot of these short term problems that are serious in nature and substantial and wide in scope. So, when you look at things like salary top ups and so on, those things are very necessary to help Guyanese keep pace with the cost of living increases. Very necessary. But when you look at things like the increase in the income tax threshold that will allow people who are working at the lower end of the income scale to not pay tax below a certain level. The party's spoken about getting rid of income tax. It's with respect to those lower income workers. This is all really tied towards dealing with increases in the cost of living and improving people's standards of living more generally. But ultimately, a good government which governs from the left, looks at the people first, must be run efficiently. And if it's run efficiently, you can see really good outcomes. It's just that in a lot of countries, you see a high degree of corruption. You see these programs not administered effectively, and as a result, a lot of these left-wing policies fall apart. So it's not that they're doomed to these types of criticisms that they face. It's just a question of how they're managed. And even when you look at your first video, which talked a bit about poverty traps and so on, those typically will come about where you have policies that are not very well planned, that have specific problems. And one of the things that we talk about with the salary top ups and so on is that those things should be gradually adjusted as income rises rather than having a sharp fall off. So that gradual adjustment will minimize as much as possible the effect of people thinking it's better to stay at home than to come out and work. So you can design your policies, you can have a good look at it, and you can see what progress you can make on the basis of that. But just labeling left as bad and right as bad, or right as good as left as good, misunderstands the way that these things can be used to actually have an effective governance system. And I think we must learn the lessons of the past without having this heavy emphasis on government being involved in everything. But where government is involved, it must be involved effectively. And if we do that, I think we'll be okay.
All right. Interesting thoughts. And I thank you for your perspective there. What I want to do in the remaining time that we have is to touch on what is very obvious right now is going on in the world. We have a surge in oil prices. And this is, of course, affecting Guyanese consumers. Uh, where do you see this going, Elson? Given the global political issues, and we know there are lots of moves being made in the background. I know that the US is considering oil from Venezuela. That's an interesting dynamic there in itself. Interesting politics, geopolitical dynamic. But of course, sanctions being imposed on Russia, on their imports or the exports of oil. And this conflict in Ukraine is affecting global oil prices. And, I jumped in a taxi this afternoon, and the taxi driver said, "Well, I put $5,000 gas in this car. This thing barely move." And so we're bracing for to see how high this will go. Any chance we will see oil prices go over $300 in the coming months?
Well, I'm not an oil trader, so I can't predict.
But
But what I can tell you is a couple of things.
Mhm.
I think the first being, I think the market's reaction in pushing prices up is very understandable given the size of the issue, which is potential, and already we're seeing it ban of oil altogether from Russia. But I think that there's secondary effects we'll have to consider over the medium to longer term. One being that sanctions are a funny thing in that companies will avoid as much as possible dealing with any country or any company that is sanctioned. So a
Mhm.
lot of effects will end up lasting for longer than we anticipated. I also think that there will be a lot of bitterness in the West about this Ukraine conflict after the conflict has finally been settled. It may unfortunately be due to reasons that are partially motivated by race. It's possible that Western countries feel more connection now that they're seeing people who look like them in war zones. That's something that people have complained is concerning to them. But that is possible in the sense that it may cause much more tension in the West, and they may very well be very reluctant to ease sanctions on Russia for some time yet. So that may again push the price up. In the short run, as much as the US is speaking with Venezuela and other countries, the problem is Venezuela has not invested substantially in its oil and gas industry because the country is in substantial difficulties.
Yeah.
And as a result, I am not convinced that they can actually increase production very much over what they already have. So, in the short run, I don't think that's much of a solution. I'm not convinced in the longer run that it's a solution either, because I think those industries have substantially deteriorated in the past few years through all of these crises. We'll see whether we see other producers increase, like the US shale producers and so on. But the point
Yeah.
being, I think higher oil prices are here to stay for some time. I think that we must look now at how we mitigate these things. Of course, Guyana will be benefiting from these higher oil prices. And we're seeing the government talk about a $5 billion amount that was put aside for mitigating costs of living increases in the national budget. They're talking about how they're going to allocate that, and they said they're doing consultations. I don't know if they'll intend to consult with the with the opposition for once. But the thing about it is, I am not convinced that that will be enough because that number was put in place. Those funds were set aside before the Ukraine crisis.
Yeah.
And other things are going up. Today, Namco announced a 15% increase in the cost of flour. And they said that from February 15th to now, they've seen a 40% increase in the price of flour, which
I,
implies,
yeah.
I think,
I,
flour
I want
prices.
to jump. Let me jump in here on that, because as we talk about oil prices, Elson, the the market is indicating that there is going to be, and there is a spike in food prices. Now, many persons might not know the influence and the great impact that Russia and Ukraine has on the global wheat market. Ukraine has 77% of agricultural land. They are a big producer of wheat and grain. They're seen like the breadbasket of Europe. So this crisis is not only affecting oil prices as it relates to those sanctions in Russia, but Russia and Ukraine are big players in the world's wheat market. And, I can understand the milk will increase in their prices. I can understand because a number of countries around the world import their wheat from that part of the world, and it's going to be interesting because a lot of people are not focusing on that. We talk about oil because oil, of course, is a significant thing, but as you mentioned just now, food prices are going to increase given this conflict. I'm allowing
Yeah,
to finish because I have one other political thing to add there.
yeah, absolutely. That's going to be something that again the government must consider. I don't know if they'll need to go back to Parliament for a supplemental, and of course we hope that whatever they do, it is distributed fairly to all Guyanese and not just their supporters, because that's the other concern. But
Mhm.
one more thing that just has popped up is that GPL is making murmurings that they're spending far more on fuel oil that they can afford to spend, which is a
Mhm.
murmuring that indicates the GPL's electricity rates may go up soon. So those are again things that we need to address. We cannot have a country that is benefiting hugely from oil, but all of the negative effects of these high prices, the citizens are feeling it. That makes no sense. I expect
Yeah.
Guyana to beat its GDP estimates substantially, the growth to be even higher than we thought. Let's make sure that ordinary Guyanese is not suffering when the country is growing so quickly.
Yeah, interesting thoughts there. I know that the government has these taxes that they can reduce on the oil so as to mitigate the price, the increasing prices at the pump. Whether or not that will be done, we don't know, or we don't know the number that the oil has to reach at the pump before the government steps in and say, you know what, we will reduce the taxes by X amount. There was one time in the last a couple of years ago when oil was down to like $130 a liter, and people were driving. It was fun times, but things have changed. But I want to, of course, touch on this issue of Ukraine. A geopolitical look at what is happening in Ukraine. There, of course, it affects our pocket at the end of the day because, as we would have pointed out just now, oil prices, food prices, electricity tariffs, and prices will go up because of this. And that affects you as an average citizen, which ties in, of course, to our conversation about poverty. Those who will be greatly affected, mostly affected, are those who cannot afford. Those who cannot afford. So it is greater incentive to ensure that people in the country can afford certain things. Um, but on a geopolitical point, there are many questions as to how this conflict will end in Ukraine, and this is just to segue as we conclude our program this evening, to talk a bit of geopolitics here. Um, you know, I said I don't see that Putin will just turn back now and decide, you know what, I'll pull my forces out and I'll come out. He cannot go back to Russia without something to show. Again, he has basically said that this is a special operation to demilitarize whatever. My thing is, and I've seen this over the last couple of days, is that Zelensky is open to concessions. Look, you know what? You've already taken Crimea. You want the Donbass region. You want Lugansk, and you want Donetsk. Take those two regions. Leave Ukraine alone. I believe that that's an outfit for Putin. I believe that that is something to say. You know what? We have legally and officially taken these two areas under Russian rule, and we're going to pull out. I don't believe that Russia has an appetite for a long-term conflict in Ukraine. It is going to be draining to their resources. It's going to be devastating to them. They're not going to take full control over the country because the people are united against them. There's going to be continuous fighting for 20, 25 years if they decide to stay. So I don't see. It has to be a diplomatic end to this, and I want your thoughts on this before we go, because that has
Sure.
implication for what happens around the world. But I see that there is space for a diplomatic ending to this, where Ukraine says, you know what, you've already had your separatist people in those regions, take it, right? Leave the rest of Ukraine. Your thoughts on that as we end our program today?
Yeah, I definitely
Mhm. All right.
I see where you're coming from, but for me, I don't think that it was necessary to invade to get those two breakaway regions. I don't think that he at all needed to invade in order to get those two regions. I think he could have gotten them without an invasion. Number one, number two. Remember, a lot of Russian identity is tied up in Ukraine. There's some talk about the founding of Russia being tied to Kiev and so on. And I also think that given the severity of the damage to the Russian economy and the potential future severity of the damage, I think that anything less than a total victory will not be received well at home.
Yeah.
And so I am a lot more pessimistic, unfortunately. I think that he's going to try and take the entire country. I think what I'm most worried about is that there'll be an accident. That is to say, that in the course of trying to take Ukraine, other countries may be drawn into the battle. We see that Poland was very nearly drawn in by looking to send some jets to Ukraine, and I am concerned that that may escalate the conflict more than it already is. But I think that unfortunately, so much blood has been spilled and so much treasure that an amicable solution, and perhaps this is why they've had so much trouble getting any kind of ceasefire to get civilians out. It is that the Russian government seems to be quite desperate to get this done, so they're not willing to even back off a second to allow civilians out. So I take a more pessimistic view, and I hope that it doesn't end up in that direction.
Yeah.
But it's I think that the circumstances are already very concerning.
Interesting. And as we watch those developments there in that part of the world, we understand the ramifications for our pockets as we of course focus on the business side of things here. But of course, those geopolitical issues affect that. Elson Low, economist and a comrade, want to say thank you. And of course, we're looking forward. I know you didn't get to start your program last Saturday. We're looking forward to tomorrow night where you start your program, and we'll be tuned in. And we encourage persons who are looking at our program this evening to join Elson tomorrow night. The name of the program?
The Lowdown with Elson Low from 7 to 8 p.m. Start your Friday night, your Saturday night on a high with Elson Low. The Lowdown.
Right. So we'll definitely be looking at that. Elson, we want to say thank you very much for being a part of the program, sharing a perspective. This conversation about poverty in Guyana has to continue. We still have a number of people living below that poverty line, and we have to be able to present information, present alternative strategies to ensure that all Guyanese are lifted out of that. So, Elson, thank you very much for joining the program tonight. We'll continue this discussion on another night. Do enjoy the rest of the evening.
You too.
Right. Folks, that was Elson Low, our resident economist on the program here. And folks, we're just about out of time. And we want to say, of course, you stay tuned to APN UFC TV for In the Ring with Sher Duncan. That should be starting shortly. And we leave you in the capable hands of Mr. Duncan as he deals with all the other topics that would have surfaced in Guyana today and surface in Guyana and around the Caribbean today. You know, we deal specifically with business, and then we leave the current affairs and all of the action in the ring for Sherrod Duncan. So join us again on Tuesday. I will be on Sunday with a brand new program. Do stay tuned for that, or look out for that on Sunday. And then I'll be back on Tuesday with another the Rush Business. And folks, let me say this. I want to start our morning program. I want to restart the morning program because I did do the morning program earlier when we first started after the recount. I used to host the morning program. So we'll be ready. We'll be starting. We'll restart our program. It'll be branded the Morning Rush and be on at 7 to 8. And we hopefully will be able to do every morning. So look out for that. But right now, we'll leave you. As I usually say, folks, let's continue. Let's continue to work together for national development. My name is Randolph Critchell, and I thank you very much for tuning in. Remember, you can share the live stream. Share the live stream even as you go so other persons may be able to come in and look at the program. Do enjoy the rest of your evening.